Good morning and welcome to First United Methodist Church of Costa Mesa's online service. I'm Pastor Sarah Heath, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you here and welcome you into my home office. We continue as a community to shelter in place. And so today, different parts of the service will be led from different people's homes as we do what's known as the liturgy or the work of the people. Thank you so much for joining us. Along those lines, I'm excited to say that this morning we are going to hear a message from Justin McRoberts. Justin is a really amazing writer, speaker. He also has his own podcast, and he has written books with my dear friend Scott Erickson, May It Be So and Prayer, which is 40 Days of Practice. These are the two books that I've been using for my own Lenten practice, along with our prayer word cards from Sanctified Art to sort of center and ground myself during this season of Lent. Justin is a very talented speaker, and I can't wait for you to hear from him. There are lots of announcements for us as a community, so please check those out along the bottoms. They include that we are participating in a 24-hour prayer group. We also have different ways that you can get involved. Theology on Tap is April 3rd, so if you want to join in that. But perhaps the biggest announcement for you to hear is that we're continuing to do online services. April 5th and 12th, which is Palm Sunday, and Easter will be online. And the reason that we're doing that is that we want to caregive for the most vulnerable in our community. And we want to make sure that even if other businesses and things are opening, we as a community are going to gather online so that we can caregive for the health of others. So with all of that being said, thank you so much for joining us, and let us join together as you hear the call to worship.
Hi, we're Michael and Darlene Bischoff. Thank you for joining us in our call to worship. I will be reading the liturgist part.
And I will be reading the people part, so read along with me.
God is in the water that restores our soul.
And God is in the night when we lose our way.
God is in today and tomorrow, raising up leaders, prophets, and dreamers.
And God is in the wilderness with us every step of the way.
So with confidence we declare,
if God is in those spaces, then God is surely here.
Let us worship the God of creation.
Let us worship the God of wilderness spaces.
Trust the sweetest Today's reading is John chapter 11, verses 1 to 45. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus, "Lord, he whom you love is ill." But when Jesus heard it, he said, "This illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it." Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this he said to the disciples, "Let us go to Judea again." The disciples said to him, "Rabbi, the Jews were just now trying to stone you, and are you going there again?" And Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Those who walk during the day do not stumble, because they see the light of the world. But those who walk at night stumble, because the light is not in them." After saying this, he told them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to awaken him." The disciples said to him, "Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will be all right." Jesus, however, had been speaking about his death, but they thought he was referring merely to sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. For your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Thomas, who was called the Twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world." When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench, because he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what Jesus did, believed in him.
So there's a lot about this text that I really, really, really like. A lot about the story that is moving for me. This is one of those really deep, rich accounts on the life of Jesus. The fact that there are people in this story with whom Jesus clearly has like a deeper personal connection that are not, part of the 12. They're not like in the what we consider the inner circle a lot of times, including Lazarus and Mary and Martha. the fact that there's this miracle here and it has to do with resurrection and the role of death and Jesus's relationship and power relationship with death, and there's a ton. Even Jesus's own humanity here is really moving. But the thing I wanted to stick around, the thing I want to pay attention to, specifically in light of your series around a series about the wilderness, is that this is a story whose engine ultimately ends up being disappointed expectations. And you and I both know that living as like a relatively fully developed adult comes with having and setting expectations and then living with some degree of disappointment a lot of the time. And learning to not be overwhelmed by disappointment, learning to live with those expectations, knowing we're going to be disappointed in expectations, to have that constant struggle between this tension between wanting things, hoping for things, expecting things to work out a certain way, and then seeing a lot of left turns, sometimes right turns, watching the ball hit the ground. This relationship between disappointment and expectation. This is a story, like I said, whose engine really ultimately is disappointment and expectation. Some of the disappointments, all my notes are right here. This is why I'm looking over it. Like the fact that Lazarus gets sick just by itself is already a disappointment. Because especially at the time, and you know this, like depending on the nature of the illness, a lot of illnesses that for you and I are just kind of basic common illnesses. I'll be sick for a few days, antibiotics and etc. Whatever you deal with your illnesses, like the people died of stuff on the regular that like wouldn't kill the modern person because of modern medicine. But so to get sick at this point could mean anything. In fact, this is what happens with Lazarus. He gets sick, and the expectation is because he's sick, the thought is he's gonna die. That's really, really disappointing. And so in relationship to that, you know, what Jesus says, he seems to suggest that Lazarus isn't going to die. But what he says, the text is, when Jesus heard about it, he said, "This illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God might be glorified through it." So if you're someone who's standing there, or if this is a message that gets back to Mary and Martha, the fact that Jesus said, hey, this illness will not lead to death, but then Lazarus actually does die. I mean, there's no getting around that in the story. Lazarus is dead. And Jesus seemed to allude to this, like, thing that he's not going to die even though he's sick. That's incredibly disappointing. And then after he says this, that Lazarus is not going to die and that this is for God's glory, etc., he doesn't leave right away. Even though the illness is grave and everyone else seems to know he's very sick, something, Jesus sticks around for 2 more days. Not 1 more day, not for a few hours. He sticks around. He does not leave for 2 days. And I find that incredibly confounding. How disappointing to have sent this message specifically to Jesus to say, hey, there's someone you know you love. We know you love him. We know you care about him. You know you care about us. In general, you are this loving, compassionate, kind person. You stopped in the middle of the street to talk to some woman you've never met before who was bleeding. And so this is a friend. The expectation here is you're going to come help. You have the power to help. And he doesn't for 2 days. And in that 2-day period, Lazarus dies. Which then takes me to the right before he leaves, the conversation he has with the disciples about death and sleep, where he says the conversation goes to, you know, he's not dead, he's just asleep. And then the disciples say, well, if he sleeps, he'll get better. So good. And then Jesus tries to clear it up and says, well, I mean, he really is actually dead. And then Thomas, God bless him, is my favorite. Thomas says, well, then let us go die with him. Like, he's trying so hard to be like, I don't really know what's going on. I just want to be in. Do I need to die? Is that what's happening? And then to go with Jesus in confusion, like it wasn't cleared up. What's that? Is he dead? Is he asleep? Is he going to get better? What's going on? They were in this darkness even as they left. When he arrives, the words that Jesus receives are deeply, deeply rooted in disappointment. Lord, if you had been here, then he would have lived. He would not have died. And then a few verses later, he gets it again. Lord, if you had been here. Again, the expectation. We sent you this message. You said something about him not dying. And then you stayed where you were for 2 days. If you had been here, this would have gone differently. Man, you might be with me in this. Like, I have more than once in my life honestly thought these things, like, he's the Lord. God loves me. Jesus is good. This is all terrible. This is awful. This is painful. If you had been here, this would have been different. You're the healer. You're the truth teller. You're good. This is bad. If you were actually in this, this would be different. I get this. I deeply resonate with this moment in the story where these people who love a brother they just lost say to the Lord, had you been here, it would have been different. I get that. Expectations. See, we do see, in the story, we do see a resurrection. But before we get there, we have to travel through all of these disappointments. We have to travel through all of these expectations that are not met. So, a few years ago, and this is a short little story about expectations and what and what happens in my mind with the expectations I have. I took a trip with some friends up into Canada to go skiing. I don't ski a whole lot anymore for a bunch of reasons, but I was skiing with some friends, and we were staying just outside of this pretty cool like ski village. And it was like the third or fourth day. We arrived kind of later morning to the ski village and got our tickets. And in the sort of central part of the ski village, they were setting up a stage. And we didn't know exactly what it was for. There were a lot of activities and kind of activities. It makes it sound like youth camp. There were a lot of things happening in the town. It was like spring break or something. I don't remember exactly the time period, but they were setting the stage up. We didn't know what was going to go on, but like, how cool, it's a stage. And we were, talking all day. Like, I wonder who might show up. You think it's a concert? You think it's for us? You think it's private? Whatever. And at lunchtime, we're sitting at a table, and I hear the people behind me talking about the Beastie Boys. You might not know who the Beastie Boys are. I do. They're a hip-hop rap group from my era. I'm 46. And I get sort of stoked. I turn around and I ask the guy at the table, I'm like, are you saying the Beastie Boys? He's like, yeah, we're hearing the Beastie Boys are going to be here tonight. And I was like, oh man. And then as the day progressed on the hill, people, like, this rumor that the Beastie Boys were showing up that night, it kind of spread all over the place. And it was on the chairlifts, and it was like in the cafes, it was like, Beastie Boys are showing, the Beastie Boys, do you guys know the Beastie Boys are showing? By 5 o'clock, as the hill's starting to empty, everyone has assembled around and like in the sort of square around the stage. It's probably like 700 people just packed in this area, and it's getting colder and colder and colder. And people have gone out and like they got dinner and like the places are starting to kind of pack with people. They're bringing food out and now people are eating dinner together and passing food around, and people are just excited about the Beastie Boys. And somehow, and I don't know who started the rumor, but the show was going to start like right at 7. I don't know who said that, but they got around. So the Beastie Boys, not just there wasn't just a stage, the Beastie Boys would be on it, and the show was starting at 7. You can see where the story is going. So at, I don't know, 6:45, like the roar, the chant, the Beastie Boys, Beastie gets going. 6:55, we're just fever pitch, screaming, yelling, people on people's shoulders. And at this point, like right before 7 o'clock, there's a stagehand, and I don't know where he'd been before, and this is my favorite part of the story. He walks out to the middle of the stage, and he's holding a microphone stand, one of the straight stands. There's no microphone on this thing. It's just a straight stand. And he walks out and sets a straight stand in the middle of the stage, looks at all of us and goes, and then walks off. In a minute, you'll know why that was my favorite part of the story. 7:02, We're screaming and yelling. Beastie Boys are coming. Beastie Boys. There are no lights, nothing. 7:10, it's getting quieter. 7:15, people start to leave. And Beastie Boys is now like, Beastie Boys? Well, the Beastie Boys were never showing up. 7:25, 7:30, people start to leave. Frustration, disappointment. The Beastie Boys were never coming. There was never any promise whatsoever made that the Beastie Boys were coming. The only truth was that there was a stage set. That is it. The only reality there was that the stage was set. The rest of it, we just filled in. We just piled into this empty space with the empty stage, all of our expectations of what was going to happen there. The Beastie Boys at 7 o'clock. Now, obviously, the comedy of this is the disappointment. That's the comedy. But here's the thing that I really only thought of like years later as I was telling this story about my disappointment, is that if you had told me at the beginning of that day, or at the beginning of the trip, because this was like I said, day 3 or something along those, I don't remember exactly, but if you had told me that at some point, the end of my ski day on that day would find me with like 700, 800 people in the square, having dinner together and cracking jokes and passing snacks around and sharing wine. If you would have told me that that's what my evening was going to be like on that night, I would have been stoked and I would have shown up for that. But because I was reading the event in that moment through the expectation of the Beastie Boys, I kind of missed how cool that was, and I only really recognize it in retrospect. Our expectations aren't bad things necessarily. In fact, my expectation is of something that wasn't going to be entirely true led me to a place where something really, really good happened. So maybe the trick isn't just dropping all of my expectations. Maybe the trick is actually holding my expectations of God loosely enough that I can be led into a place where, hey, this is what I'm hoping, expecting, really wanting to have happen. This is what's going to propel me in this direction. And when my expectations are disappointed, I can let go of those expectations at least enough to recognize what's actually happening and who I'm with, and then receive and enjoy the fact that I get to participate in it at all. So what's that look like in practice? How do we actually do that? How do we live with our expectations, knowing we're going to be disappointed, but also allow our expectations to propel us into the situations in which we can receive the goodness of life and the goodness of God around us? A couple tools that for me are really helpful. One is just the simple question, am I aware? Do I even know what it is that I'm expecting of God? Being aware of my expectations actually sets me up to then pay attention to what is happening. If I know what I wanted to have happen, if I know what I was expecting, I can then know the difference between that, especially if those things are disappointed, and what actually is there. So if we're talking about the wilderness, you've likely heard the phrase that, he or she couldn't see the forest for the trees. The idea that if you're out in the wilderness, like the notion that there's nothing happening out there, it's completely desolate, that you're out on your own, that this is all maybe even bad, it's just darkness and lostness, etc. The thing is, it's pretty much never true. It's never true that it's all bad. It's never true that you're completely isolated. It's never true that there's nothing happening, that God has dropped the ball altogether. There is always something at hand. There is always some process of goodness at hand. Always, every time, every moment of every single day. My capacity, and the wisdom by which I recognize that at least begins with me saying, hey, this is what I expected. Now I know what that is. What is happening around me? And this is where I come to this sort of hallmark moment. Because one of the things that is always happening in the wilderness, in the midst of disappointment, one of the things that is always happening in the wilderness is you. You're there. You're never actually alone. The disappointments in life that lead us to the places we call wilderness, the brokennesses, the pitfalls, the actual emotional, psychological, social devastation of life that puts us in places that we would call wilderness, you're never actually alone there. In fact, more so than anything else, the world around you entities, the corporate political entities, spiritual entities that actually don't want good for you. The elements in this world that don't want good for you, like, will do their damnedest to convince you that you're alone. That if you're in the wilderness, you're the only one. You're the only person who is still dealing with this. You're the only mom who cannot get, you're the only dad who has never, you're the only business person who can, you're the only pastor who can, you're it. You're alone, you're in isolation, it's just you. And if I can get you there, if I can get you to believe that you are isolated and just by yourself, I can get you to hang your head, just watch your own feet as you walk, and then I can help you ignore the other people in the wilderness with you. Because there's nothing in the world as powerful when we're in this place of wilderness than recognizing that we are in it with other people. When I'm in the wilderness, when I'm feeling alone, one of the questions I'm learning to ask myself is like, am I aware of the expectations and the disappointments in the lives of the people around me? Because I'm going to guarantee you I'm sharing a lot of what I'm going through with some other people. About a decade and a half ago, when I started seeing a therapist one-to-one for the first time, I'd been to group therapy for some things previous to that, but I'd never gone to just one-to-one therapy because I was one of those folks who tragically believed that therapy was not for me because I wasn't weak. Turns out therapy is for people who take their health seriously. And so I've regularly seen the therapist since then. But this first time, I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed to go see a therapist because I felt isolated. That's the thing about being wounded, about being disappointed in my life, in God, is I end up feeling like I'm alone. And that isolation, like, I didn't want people to know like I was out here on an island broken all by myself and that I needed therapy. So I didn't tell anyone that I was going to see a therapist. And I drove across town. I didn't even park in the lot where the office is. I parked in the lot across the way. There's a grocery store there, and pretended like I was walking into the grocery store, and then took a hard right and crossed the street and put my hood over my head and like ran through the parking lot, got to the staircase. Didn't even take the elevator because I didn't want to see people. Took the staircase to the third floor, hauled down the hallway. Funny, walked down the hallway briskly. And with my, again, hood over my head as to not be recognized by, like, I don't know, the CIA. I have no idea. And I didn't think about this, but like there would be a waiting room. Duh. So as soon as I opened the door, there are all these other people, like 5 or 6 other people who are like waiting in the waiting room to see therapists. And I pull my hood up off my head and they look up at me, and this woman sitting in the chair just off to my right, I'm sure she recognized the look on my face and knew what was going on in my guts, because what she did, there was a seat available next to her, but she had like a bag and a magazine in it, and she pulled her stuff off, put it in, and tucked it underneath the chair, and she patted the seat and she said, "You can sit here. You can sit here." And my therapy started then. Like, my therapy started not when I got into the room and sat down with Terry. My therapy started when I was invited to belong to other people who were sharing the same kinds of burdens. In the wilderness of disappointment, the voice that will most assuredly tear me down is the one that tells me I'm the only one dealing with this. I'm the only one who feels this way. I'm isolated and I'm alone. And the question in me, am I aware of the needs, the frustrations, the expectations, and the disappointments of people around me when I'm in my own disappointment? Can I ask that question? What about the people around me? Who else is experiencing something similar? Anything at all? Lifts my head so I can see I'm never in the wilderness alone. I get to be not just someone who is welcomed by other folks, but I also get to be someone who can look someone in the face and like, no, I get that. I hear you. You can sit here. You can be in this wilderness with me. I'll walk with you for a while. See, back to that really sad moment of disappointed expectation, that when he arrived, this woman he loved said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, then he would not have died." Maybe the expectation in her had a lot to do with what Jesus could or should have done. with regards to power and healing and resurrection. I'm sure that's an element. But listen to the words. If you had been here, isn't the expectation, isn't the real disappointment that I expected you to come when I called? That's what I expected. I expected that when I called you, you would show up. You weren't here. And I wonder if that's why we find this really powerful moment where Jesus actually cries. Is it just because Lazarus is dead? Or is it because he wants the people he loves to know, I am with you in it. I know you feel isolated. I know you feel you're in this wilderness, you're off on your own, and so many of your expectations have been disappointed. I know that. I want you to know I'm in it with you. More than anything else. Yes, I want you to know that I can do something about some of this, and I plan on doing something. I plan on doing something about everything in some way, shape, or form, but more than anything else, I want you to know I'm in it with you. I'm present. Maybe that's where those tears come from in Jesus, is the desire for you and I, for the people he loves, to know that he's present with us in the wilderness. So is it a wilderness? Yeah. Is there a lot of disappointed expectation? Gosh, so much. There's so much. But are we out there by ourselves? No. And are we only the lost and the broken and the hurt? No. No, we're out there, and yeah, we're people in need, but at the same time, we are also healers. We're also people who get to look up and recognize, what is God doing here? Yes, this is not what we expect, not what we want, but what is God doing here? And then to find some people who are out there with us and say, this is what I see in you, around you. Let me walk with you for a while.
The wilderness is a place of new life, resilient life. I used to think that the wilderness would never end. I called my mom and asked, does time really heal all wounds? Do the pieces ever fall back into place? Does the wilderness go on forever? So she told me about the horizon. She said, there is an edge where the earth meets the sky. And when you're there, you will see daisies on the sidewalk and the sun after the rain. I asked her to draw me a map, and she cried, because she knew this road was mine to walk. But she promised to wait for me day in and day out, as long as the wilderness raged. So I walked, and it felt like 40 days, and it hurt like 40 nights. And I waved to the people I passed there in the wilderness. We tipped our hats to one another, silently recognizing the weight that we each carried. Until one day I realized, the earth always kisses the sky, and this wilderness has turned into a garden, and I have made it out alive. And my mother hugged me, and at the earth's edge, and she whispered in my ear that God was the gardener, and that I had nothing to fear. So if you ever ask for a map, know that God and I will be planting seeds, hoping to turn your wilderness into a garden. For as long as the wilderness rages on, I will never stop looking for you where the earth kisses the sky.
Well, good morning, everyone, and happy Sunday. Please join me now in singing Build My Life by House Fires. Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one we could ever sing. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder. Show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me into love to those around me. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder. Show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in love to those around me.
Hello, my name is Lamont, and I would just like to take a moment to thank you for joining us at First United for this week's digital worship. If you're watching with us this Sunday, jump on over to our Facebook Live group for the prayers of the people. Also, join us next week as we continue to journey together in the wilderness. I'd love to pray a blessing over you before you hop on over to our Facebook Live group. Romans 15:13 says this: May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, so that by the power of the Holy Spirit you may abound in hope. God bless you.